Hello and thanks for joining us for this episode of Into the Killing. For this episode, we're going back to March 1975. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as the RCMP, was founded in 1920. The RCMP is Canada's National Police Service. It's similar to the FBI in the United States. RCMP officers are often called Mounties. In May 1974, the Commissioner of the RCMP announced that for the first time, they would be accepting applications from women for the position of Mountie. They accepted 32 women who formed the all-female RCMP Troop 17. On March 3, 1975, 30 women graduated from the academy and were made Mounties. At the time of this recording, 1/5 of all Mounties are women. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born in April 1889 in London, England. Chaplin grew up in poverty. His father was rarely around, and his mother was committed to an asylum when he was 14. His parents were both music hall performers. When Chaplin was just 9, he started performing at music halls. He developed his physical comedy skills while performing. In 1914, Chaplin moved to Los Angeles, California, and entered the movie business. Chaplin's best-known character, the Little Tramp, was a hit with audiences. Chaplin was a master of physical comedy, and this made him ideal for silent films. Chaplin went on to write and direct his own films. His most well-known films are The Gold Rush, Modern Times, and The Great Dictator. For many years, Chaplin was considered the most famous person in the world. He's arguably the most iconic silent film actor and one of the most important filmmakers of all time. On March 4th, 1975, 86-year-old Charlie Chaplin was knighted. People thought it was odd it took so long for him to receive knighthood. It turned out that there had been plans to have Chaplin knighted 19 years earlier, but Chaplin was a known communist sympathizer. He had even met with the leaders of China and the Soviet Union. 4 years earlier, Chaplin had been denied entry into the US because of his links to communism. The British thought that knighting Chaplin would damage relations between them and the United States, so Chaplin's knighthood was vetoed. But by March 1975, things had changed and Chaplin was knighted. He died 2 years later at age 88. In March 1975, Muhammad Ali was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. At the time, Ali had only lost 2 matches. Only 3 men had knocked him down, and only 5 had made it to 15 rounds with him. Boxing promoter Don King set up a bout between 33-year-old Muhammad Ali and 36-year-old Chuck Wepner at the Richfield Coliseum in Richfield County, Ohio, to be held on March 24, 1975. Wepner was a lesser-known boxer, but he had been on an 8-match win streak. At the time, black boxers were dominating the sport. King, hoping some controversy would result in more revenue, promoted the fight as a way to, quote, give the white guy a chance, unquote. Wepner, who is white, was a part-time boxer who had never trained under a dedicated coach. Going into the fight, Ali was favored 10-1. Wepner surprised many by going the distance with Ali. In the 9th round, he knocked down Ali. Ali got to his feet, and they fought on till the 15th round. Then Ali knocked Wepner to the mat. Wepner attempted to get up and fight on, but he was badly cut. He often got cut in the ring. Wepner, who lived in Bayonne, New Jersey, had the nickname the Bayonne Bleeder. The match was stopped with only 19 seconds left. Wepner needed 23 stitches after the match. Many were impressed that Wepner managed to last that long in the ring with one of, if not, the greatest boxers of all time. One person who saw the match on a closed circuit in a movie theater was a down-on-his-luck actor. The actor was Sylvester Stallone. Stallone was inspired by Wepner, and in 3 days, he wrote the screenplay for Rocky. Rocky was released in December 1976. Rocky was a massive success. It was the highest-grossing movie released in 1976, and it was nominated for 10 Academy Awards. It took home 3 statues: Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Editing. It launched Stallone's career in the Rocky franchise. It also popularized the rags to riches sports story. Charles Wepner retired from boxing in May 1978, 3 years after his bout with Muhammad Ali. He finished his career with a record of 36-13-2. After he retired, he got into alcohol sales. At the time of this recording, Charles Wepner is 85 It Lives in Bayonne. On March 25, 1975, Lady Marmalade by LaBelle was the #1 song. The #1 movie was Escape to Witch Mountain. Kensington is a town about 9 miles north of Washington, D.C. It was home to sisters 12-year-old Sheila and 10-year-old Katherine Lyon. Their father, John Lyon, was a popular radio announcer. Sheila and Katherine had 2 brothers, 14-year-old Jay and 9-year-old Joe. Katherine and Sheila were considered good kids. They both behaved at home and were honor roll students. On March 25, 1975, at 11 a.m., the sisters set off on foot to a nearby mall, the Wheaton Plaza in Wheaton, Maryland. They were going to have some lunch and then browse the mall. It was spring break, and that upcoming weekend was Easter. The girls wanted to check out the Easter decorations at the mall. The mall was about a half-mile walk from their home. Around 1 p.m., their brother, Jay, saw them at the mall. Sheila and Katherine were expected to be home at around 3 p.m., but they never made it there. Their frantic parents, John and Mary, reported them missing, and massive searches were launched. John and Mary did not believe they ran away. When they left for the mall, they only had $2 to $3. At the time, they were saving their money for an upcoming summer vacation. If they were running away, wouldn't they have taken all their money? The girls were not found that night or over the next several days. The 2 girls were born 2 years and 1 day apart. March 29th was Katherine's birthday, and they still weren't found. Then Sheila's 13th birthday passed. Over the 5 days the sisters had been missing, no trace of them had been found. The searches were extensive. The ductwork in the basement of the mall had been searched. 60 officers walked arm in arm to search some woods. 3 divers searched the pond. A special team of dogs were brought in to search for the girls. But no progress was made on the disappearance of the girls. It was as if Katherine and Sheila vanished into thin air. After 6 days, the searches were called off. Several people at the mall saw the Lyons sisters talking to a middle-aged man with gray hair who had a tape recorder. Composite sketches of the man were made public. A 13-year-old friend of the sisters saw a young man with dark hair and a mustache leering at the sisters. She remembered him because he had been staring at her and it creeped her out. She described the man to a sketch artist, but it does not appear that the sketch was widely distributed. Over 300 tips were received regarding the sketch of the man with the tape recorder, and the police followed up on them, but none of the tips led them any closer to the girls' whereabouts. The case eventually went cold. "11 years later, in 1986, a new suspect emerged. On August 21, 1976, the police in Bristol, Tennessee, were investigating the murder of 8-year-old Travis Shane King. Travis had gone missing from his apartment that afternoon. His body was found the next day, 17 miles away, in a rural area. He had been asphyxiated to death. At least half a dozen people saw Travis with a lanky man with gray hair who had a metal detector. He was driving a Pontiac Sunbird. Then, nearly a month after the murder, a woman who saw the man park his car and take out the metal detector saw him again. She followed him home and recorded his address and license plate. She reported the information to the police. The man was identified as 41-year-old Fred Howard Coffey. Coffey was born in 1945 in Bristol, Virginia. His father had sexually and physically abused him and his sister. When his mother discovered the abuse, she left him and took the kids. But Coffey's father repeatedly kidnapped him and his sister. He took them to motel rooms where he sexually abused them while the other one watched. Coffey had a criminal record for sexually abusing minors. In the mid-60s, he was charged with indecent exposure and one count of taking indecent liberties with a minor. He received probation. A year later, he was arrested again for sexually abusing a child. But it's unknown what the results of those charges were. Before moving to Bristol, Tennessee, where Travis was murdered, Coffey lived in Caldwell County, North Carolina. It turned out that the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department had a warrant out for Coffey's arrest. He was wanted for molesting 3 girls under the age of 12 in Caldwell County. The abuse happened between February 1984 and 1986. When the police in Bristol, Tennessee discovered that there was a warrant for Coffey's arrest, he was taken into custody and his apartment was searched. They found an empty box for a metal detector, but the metal detector was missing. The police surmised that Coffey got rid of it because he realized that people saw Travis King with a man using a metal detector. The police determined that Coffey's mother lived next to Travis's apartment building. Coffey was also the suspect in several other child murders. 7 years earlier, on July 19, 1979, 10-year-old Amanda Ray was found strangled to death in a wooded area 19 miles from her home in Charlotte, North Carolina. She had been missing for about 24 hours. The police interviewed her friends. One day before she went missing, Amanda was fishing with a friend at a creek near her home. As they were fishing, a lanky man with gray hair approached them and talked to them. Afterward, the man walked towards a set of apartments. Coffey, who was lanky with gray hair, lived in the apartments. The next day, Amanda was at a local pool and she was seen talking to a man with gray hair. While at the pool, Amanda called her mother at work and asked her if she could go fishing with the nice gray-haired man who lived in the neighborhood. Her mother told her no. Amanda's friends saw her leave the pool with the gray-haired man. Several people saw a girl matching Amanda's description and a gray-haired man fishing at a nearby lake. The man was driving a blue van with horizontal blue stripes. That was the type of van Coffey drove. About 24 hours later, Amanda's dead body was found in the woods next to the lake. There were no signs of sexual assault. She had been suffocated. The police found 8 white dog hairs and 2 blue carpet fibers on her clothes. At the time, Coffey owned a blue van with horizontal stripes that had blue interior, and he owned a white dog. The police released a sketch of the gray-haired man. A woman called the police and said that the sketch resembled Fred Coffey. She was friends with Coffey's wife. She had caught him masturbating in front of her 3-year-old daughter. She never reported the incident to the police, but asked Coffey to talk to a priest. The police questioned Coffey about Amanda's murder, but he was not charged. About 19 months later, on April 11, 1981, 5-year-old Neely Smith went missing while playing at her apartment complex in Charlotte. Her body was found 2 months later in a rural area about 15 miles from her home. It's believed that Neely had been suffocated to death. Neely lived in the apartment complex behind Coffey's apartment building. The police interviewed him twice and his home was searched, but he was not charged. 2 weeks later, in March 1983, Coffey moved to Caldwell County. After Coffey was arrested in September 1986 for the outstanding warrant for sexually abusing the girls in Caldwell County, the police in Charlotte decided to see if they could connect him to the murders of Amanda Ray or Neely Smith. They tracked down Coffey's former wife. The police wanted to know if she still had the white dog. She said that the dog had died, but the dog used to sit on the couch and she still had the couch. It had not been cleaned since the dog died. The police took the couch as evidence. They also found the van Coffey was driving at the time of Amanda's murder. They found white dog hairs in the van and on the couch. They were matched to the dog hairs found on the body. In January 1987, Coffey pleaded guilty to molesting the 3 girls in Caldwell County. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison with a chance of parole after 15 years. A few weeks later, Coffey was charged with the murder of 10-year-old Amanda Ray. He went to trial for Amanda's murder in October 1987. He was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. Although he was a suspect in Travis King and Neely Smith's murders, he has never been charged with those murders. When the police were tracking Coffey's whereabouts over the years to see if he committed any other murders, they discovered that on April 1, 1975, 6 days after the Lyons sisters went missing, he was at a job interview in Aspen Hill, Maryland, which is about 3.5 miles from the mall. He then worked in Aspen Hill from April 24, 1975 to July 31, 1975. But the police could not determine his whereabouts on March 25, 1975, when the sisters vanished. There were several reasons why the police thought that Coffey killed Sheila and Katherine. Coffey had gray hair, and Sheila and Katherine were last seen talking to a gray-haired man with a tape recorder. It's believed that man lured the girls from the mall and killed them. In 2 of the murders where Coffey is the suspect, he lured his victims by befriending them. It's believed he lured Travis away from the home with a metal detector, and he promised to take Amanda fishing. Coffey then dumped the bodies in rural areas miles from their home. So the police thought he may have done the same with the Lyons. However, the police could not determine Coffey's whereabouts at the time of the disappearance, nor did they find any evidence linking him to the disappearance. However, Fred Coffey remained a strong suspect. Fred Coffey is a suspect in another murder in Maryland. Months after the Lyons sisters went missing, on July 24, 1975, 15-year-old Catherine Beatty was found sexually assaulted and beaten in a forest in Aspen Hill. She was alive and taken to the hospital, but she died from her injuries 11 days later. When Kathy was killed, Coffey lived in Aspen Hill. He left town 6 days later. He remains the prime suspect in the murders of Catherine Beatty, Neely Smith, and Travis King. In 2015, the evidence from Neely's murder was going to be tested for DNA and compared to Fred Coffey's DNA. However, no record of the results can be found. We're just going to take a short break to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Pretty Litter. We all know cats are picky. I am too, especially when it comes to my cat. We've gone through a ton of cat litter over the years, and the best for us, by far, is Pretty Litter. Here's why. It's simply better than every other cat litter. When you think of the downsides of cat litter, what do you think of? For me, it's heavy and dusty. Plus, it doesn't hide the smell, and it's a hassle to go out and buy. Plus, I hate searching for clumps. But Pretty Litter solves all these problems. Its non-clumping formula traps odor and moisture. Its low dust, and a single 6-pound bag works for up to a month. Plus, they ship it free right to my door, so it's super convenient. I also don't have to store dusty cat litter in my house, so Pretty Litter is better for my home and it's more convenient, but it also gives me peace of mind. Pretty Litter changes color to indicate potential illnesses in my cat, like kidney issues and urinary tract infections. With early detection, you can hopefully avoid high veterinarian bills and even save your cat's life. This is what happened with us. I've been using Pretty Litter for some time now, and one day, the litter changed color. We took Figaro to the vet, and now he's doing great. Pretty Litter's amazing. You have to try it. Go to prettylitter.com/listed to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. That's prettylitter.com/listed to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. prettylitter.com/listed. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. In 2013, Chris Homrock, a detective with the Montgomery County Police Department, was working on the disappearance of Sheila and Katherine Lyon. It had been 38 years since the Lyon sisters went missing. Popular movies released in 1975 were Nashville, Rollerball, and Death Race 2000 starring Sylvester Stallone. In 2013, popular movies included Frozen, The Great Gatsby, and Escape Plan, starring Stallone. The three biggest songs in 1975 were Love Will Keep Us Together by the Captain and Tennille, Rhinestone Cowboy by Glenn Campbell, and Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John. In 2013, there were Thrift Shop by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis featuring Wans, Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke featuring T.I. and Pharrell Williams, and Radioactive by Imagine Dragons. In 1975, popular shows that debuted included Wonder Woman, The Jeffersons, and Welcome Back Kotter. Peaky Blinders, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and Orange is the New Black were popular shows that debuted in 2013. Popular books published in 1975 were Michael Crichton's The Great Train Robbery, James Clavell's Shogun, and J.G. Ballard's High Rise. In 2013, Dan Brown's Inferno, Graham Simonson's The Rosie Project, and Kate Atkinson's Life After Life were all published. Chris Homrock was born in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and he grew up in the area. He was a few years younger than Katherine and Sheila. He remembered hearing about the disappearance growing up. There had been a team investigating the case, but everyone but Homrock had retired or had been reassigned. Homrock had the lead suspect, Ray Milski. After the girls went missing, Ray had called the police and suggested that the district attorney's office offer immunity to the kidnapper if he returned the girls. Ray called again a few weeks later. He said he had seen the gray-haired man with a tape recorder at a different mall. He was trying to lure children into his car. 2 years after the disappearance of the Lyons sisters, in 1977, 41-year-old Ray Milski argued with his 37-year-old wife, Dolores, about her using the car to pick up their middle son at his friend's home. Then their eldest son, 17-year-old Raymond Jr., got involved in the argument. Ray grabbed a high-powered rifle and shot Raymond Jr. He then shot Dolores. The bullet went through his wife and into the face of his youngest son, 7-year-old Peter. Ray took Peter to the hospital and he survived. Ray then turned himself in. The police went to the family's home and found the dead bodies of 17-year-old Raymond Jr. and 37-year-old Dolores. The police found a piece of paper on Ray's bedside table. It had John Lyons' phone number on it. Ray was sentenced to 40 years of prison for the murders. After Ray was arrested, the investigators learned that he was a child sex predator. After he was incarcerated, several young women and men came forward and said that when they were minors, Ray sexually abused them. He hosted sex parties where other men abused both teenage boys and girls. While in prison, Ray frequently talked with the Lyons sisters to other inmates. There was even speculation that Ray killed his wife and son because they were going to tell the police he was involved in the disappearance of the Lyons. So in 1982, the police searched the backyard and basement of Ray's former home, but they did not find any trace of the girls. Ray Milski died in prison in 2005. In 2013, Detective Chris Homrock was trying to see if he could connect Ray to the Lyons' disappearance. He was going through the files and discovered a 6-page transcript of a statement from 18-year-old Lloyd Welch. Lloyd had dropped out in the 7th grade. He was a drifter who had problems with alcohol and drugs. On April 1st, 1975, a week after the Lyons sisters went missing, the newspaper published a story announcing a $7,000 reward for information. That same day, 18-year-old Lloyd went to the mall where the girls were last seen and found a mall security guard. He told the security guard he had seen the sisters talking to the man with the tape recorder. The security guard alerted the police, and Lloyd was taken to the police station where he gave a statement. He said he watched the Lyons sisters for 5 or 10 minutes while they interacted with a gray-haired man with a tape recorder. He heard the man say that he planned to put people's voices on the radio. Lloyd said he saw the sisters leave the mall with the man and then get into a red Camaro with white lining. He said that the man walked with a little limp. Lloyd was given a polygraph exam and he failed. The only answer that he gave that was truthful was that he was at the mall the afternoon the girls went missing. At the time, the story was dismissed because the police didn't feel he was reliable. Everything he told them could be found in the media accounts. Detective Hamrock had never seen the statement before, and something caught his attention. Lloyd said that the man walked with a little limp. None of the media descriptions of the man with the tape recorder mentioned a limp. Hamrock thought that this was interesting because years before the kidnapping, Ray was shot by the police in the leg during a home burglary. It left him with a slight limp. Detective Hamrock then began to investigate Lloyd Welch. 2 years after the disappearance, he was arrested for burglary. Hamrock found his mugshot. He looked an awful lot like the sketch of the man who was seen leering at the girls. It turned out that Lloyd was in prison in Delaware, serving a 33-year sentence for molesting a 10-year-old girl. He was arrested in 1997 and pleaded guilty to first-degree unlawful sexual intercourse and unlawful sexual penetration. The victim was his girlfriend's 10-year-old daughter. Lloyd had 2 other convictions for sexually assaulting the young daughters of his girlfriends, but he did not receive significant jail time. Lloyd was scheduled to be released in 2026. At the very least, Hamrock thought that Lloyd may have seen Ray Milski abduct the girls. But since Lloyd was convicted of sexually abusing children, he may have been involved in the kidnapping. Ray was known to groom children to help him lure other children. Hamrock thought that perhaps 39-year-old Ray had 18-year-old Lloyd lure the Lyons sisters to his car or home. On October 16, 2013, detectives Chris Hamrock and Dave Davis interviewed 56-year-old Lloyd in prison. The first thing Lloyd said was, quote, "I know why you're here. You're here about those 2 missing kids," unquote. Hamrock and Davis immediately noticed that Lloyd liked to talk. He said he didn't rape or hurt the girls. Lloyd said he saw, quote, "a minister wearing a hat, dressed in black, put 2 girls in the back seat of a black car on March 25, 1975, unquote. But he didn't see this at the mall. Instead, this happened miles away near his girlfriend Helen's home. He said he wasn't sure, but he thought that they could have been the Lyons sisters. The detective showed Lloyd a photo of Ray Milski. He said that man was the minister. He said he did not know him well. The man had picked him up twice while he was hitchhiking. He did not even know his name. Lloyd then claimed he had never been to the mall where the girls were last seen. He also said he never went to the police station to make a statement. The investigators thought it was strange that Lloyd would say this. They knew he had been to the mall where the girls were last seen and the police station. He talked to a security guard at the mall, and then he went to the police station to give his official statement. He also took a polygraph exam at the police station. In his statement, he said that he was at the mall when the Lyons sisters vanished. According to his polygraph, the only thing that Lloyd was honest about in his 1975 statement was that he had been at the mall on the day Sheila and Katherine went missing. Lloyd was confronted with these facts, and he said he did not remember going to the police station. He then conceded he went to the mall occasionally, and he may have been there that day. He claimed he had memory problems because of all the drugs he had taken. He was adamant he was not associated with Ray Milski, and he did not kidnap or hurt the girls. Lloyd told the detectives he would cooperate with the investigation if he were given immunity. The detectives thought that this was incredibly strange. Why would Lloyd need immunity if he had nothing to do with the disappearance of the girls? They set up an immunity agreement conditioned on the information he gave was truthful, candid, and complete. The immunity deal would also be voided if it turned out he was involved in the disappearance of Sheila and Katherine. Lloyd signed the agreement. He then said that he saw Ray Milski at the mall that day. He didn't call Ray by his name because he didn't know it. He maintained he just knew him from the rides he got while hitchhiking. Lloyd also said that the sketch the young man was probably him because he had been watching the girls interact with Ray, who had the tape recorder. The detectives then asked Lloyd what they thought Ray might have done to the girls. He said, quote, "Well, my opinion is that he killed them and raped them. He killed them and probably burned them. I don't know," unquote. Once again, the detectives thought that what Lloyd said was very odd. Saying he burned them seemed too specific. Lloyd maintained they had nothing to do with the disappearance of the girls. He also offered to take a polygraph exam. After that initial conversation, the detectives were convinced Lloyd Welch was involved with the kidnapping of the Lyons sisters. He had changed his story multiple times and wanted immunity. They thought he was dancing around the truth. They also noticed that he had a strange habit when it came to lying. If he was caught lying, he came up with a new story that contained elements of other stories. The investigators wondered if the elements that remained were the truth. The detectives continued to investigate him. The detectives tried to see if they could find a link between Ray and Lloyd, but they couldn't. They had contacted people who were part of Ray's inner circle, and they did not know Lloyd. The detectives concluded that the man with the tape recorder probably did not kidnap the girls. Many people saw him at the mall, and he recorded several people on the tape recorder. He had drawn a lot of attention to himself, but yet no one saw him leave the mall with the girls. Now the detectives believed that they most likely left the mall with Lloyd Welch. On February 10, 2014, nearly 4 months after the first interview, Lloyd Welch was interviewed again. This time a polygraph expert, Katie Leggett, joined the detectives. Lloyd said that the day the girls disappeared, he and his girlfriend, Helen, went to the mall to look for jobs. He saw Ray, whose name he didn't know, talk to the two girls. Then he and Helen took the bus home. He later saw Ray put the two girls into the car near Helen's home. Polygraph expert Katie Leggett determined he was lying. Lloyd was confronted with the results of the polygraph. He maintained he had been telling the truth. But then he changed his story. He said he used to get high with Ray. When talking about the sisters, Lloyd said, quote, "We took them to his house," unquote. But then he backtracked and changed his response. He said that he went to Ray's house and heard one of the girls scream when he pulled in. Lloyd explained that Ray's house had a basement with a mattress on the floor and people used to party in the basement. He said that he looked through the basement window. He saw that the two girls were naked and appeared to have been drugged. He said two men were raping them. Then Lloyd stopped talking. The police were even more convinced that Lloyd Welch knew what happened to the Lyons sisters. Including the 1975 statement, this was now his third story about the day the Lyons sisters went missing. Lloyd had even said, quote, "We took them to his house," unquote, before backtracking and say he went to his house. The biggest problem for the detectives was that the only thing Lloyd had done consistently was lie. There was no physical evidence to validate anything Lloyd said. Nevertheless, the detectives believed they were on the right track. The day after Lloyd was interviewed for the second time, he was publicly named a person of interest. On March 24, 2014, Lloyd was questioned again. Once again, he had a new story. He claimed his cousin, Teddy Welch, and another man, not Ray Milski, kidnapped the girls. Lloyd said he saw Teddy and the other man at the mall, leading the girls outside. He said Teddy was 18 to 20 years old at the time. Lloyd said that the next day he went to the house where Teddy lived with a man whose name he didn't know. Lloyd said that when he looked through the basement window, he saw Teddy and the other man with the two girls in the basement. He said that Teddy saw him looking through the window. He claimed Teddy threatened him if he said anything. Lloyd said that he feared Teddy, so that's why he did not say anything about him sooner. Even in jail, he was afraid of Teddy because Lloyd had children and he was worried that Teddy would hurt them. Lloyd explained that Ray Milski looked familiar, but he was not involved in the kidnapping. This was now the fourth story that Lloyd told about that day. The detectives decided to investigate Teddy Welch. In 2014, Teddy lived in Lusby, Maryland, with his wife and children. But very quickly, the detectives were doubtful that Teddy was involved in the disappearance of the sisters. When they went missing, Teddy was only 11 years old. It seemed unlikely that someone that young would have been involved in the kidnapping and murder of two girls. Nevertheless, the detectives decided to interview Teddy. Teddy said he did not know his cousin, Lloyd, very well. He said that when he was younger, Lloyd scared him. The detectives then learned about Teddy's unusual upbringing. When he was young, his mother abandoned him. He was left in the care of his father, who was an abusive alcoholic. When Teddy was 13, he fought back, and this landed him in a boys' home. When Teddy was 14, he went looking for his mother. He knew she lived in Clinton, Maryland, and he started hitchhiking. Leonard Crazel, a wealthy middle-aged man, picked him up. They struck up a friendship. But things didn't work out with his mother. Teddy moved in with Crazel. Crazel soon started sexually abusing the teenage boy. But Teddy thought it was a fair deal. In exchange for the abuse, he got a home and a sense of security. After Teddy moved out, Crazel stayed in his life. Then Teddy's twin sons told a school official that Crazel had been sexually abusing them. Crazel was arrested, convicted, and sent to prison. The detectives believe that Lloyd told them that Teddy was involved in the kidnapping for several reasons. The first reason was that Lloyd was hoping that because of Teddy's unstable childhood and the fact that he spent his teen years being abused by his guardian, that he was damaged enough to have committed such a terrible crime. Also, Lloyd said that Teddy and another man kidnapped the girls, so the detectives thought he was implying that Leonard Crazel, a convicted pedophile, was the other man. The problem with Lloyd's story was that in 1975, when the Lyons sisters went missing, Teddy was 11 and not 18 or 20 like he said, and Teddy didn't know Crazel then. He met Crazel 3 or 4 years later. However, the detectives weren't completely certain that Teddy wasn't somehow involved. A month before Lloyd claimed Teddy was involved in the kidnapping, just after the press conference where they identified Lloyd as a person of interest, a woman called the detectives. She said she had been at the mall when the Lyons sisters went missing. She remembered seeing a man who was possibly in his 20s with long brown hair and a mustache. She remembered him because he frightened her. He was staring at her, her friend, and other blonde girls at the mall. She and her friend were so creeped out that they wanted to tell a security guard, but ultimately decided not to. After all, the man wasn't doing anything more than staring, but it was still very creepy. The woman also said that she saw Katherine and Sheila talking to a boy about their age. She told the detectives she initially told this story to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children 2 years earlier. The detectives verified she had called the center and told them the same story. On April 24, 2014, Lloyd Welch was interviewed again. He was confronted about the fact that Teddy was only a preteen at the time of the disappearance. Once again, Lloyd had a new story about what happened that day. He said that he and Helen were at the mall and they saw Teddy with another man. He said later on that day he was at the man's house while the Lyons sisters got high. But he didn't know what happened to the girls after that. Once again, the detectives thought he was lying, but he said something interesting. This time when Lloyd talked about Sheila and Katherine, he accurately described what they were wearing when they went missing. On July 14, 2014, Lloyd was questioned again. At this point, Detective Dave Davis was conducting the interviews alone. He had built a rapport with Lloyd. Lloyd's story this time was that he went to the mall with Teddy and their uncle, Richard Welch. Richard was his father Lee's brother. Lloyd said that he and Teddy went into the mall while Richard stayed in the car. They talked to the Lyons sisters, and Teddy convinced them to come to the car where Richard was waiting. Then they all left the mall together. Lloyd said that they dropped him off at a convenience store, and that was the last time he saw the girls. Lloyd said that he didn't think that Teddy wanted to hurt the girls. Instead, he speculated that his Uncle Richard got carried away and killed the girls. He later said that he saw Richard sexually assaulting one of the girls while Teddy was in the room. He believed that his uncle kept the girls in the basement of his home, which had a separate entrance. Richard kept the basement locked, and he was the only one with a key. The police got wiretaps on Teddy, Richard, and Richard's wife, Pat Welch. Richard swore he had nothing to do with the disappearance of the Lyons sisters. Pat was fiercely protective of her husband. The detectives interviewed Pat, and she said she knew nothing about the disappearance of the sisters. On the wiretaps, the detectives heard Pat tell someone that the police were going to find something on the mountain. Many members of the Welch family lived on Taylor's Mountain in Bedford, Virginia. The police searched part of the mountain, and Pat told someone over the phone that they were looking on the wrong side of the mountain. In other conversations, Pat encouraged family members to be uncooperative with the investigators. The police interviewed as many members of Lloyd's family as possible. Some family members said that Richard had sexually abused them when they were young. When Pat was told about the abuse, she either downplayed it or denied it happened. In September 2014, the police searched Richard and Pat's home. However, it was not the house they were living in 1975. The search produced nothing of interest. The detectives were presented with more evidence that cleared Teddy. About a month before the girls went missing, Teddy climbed to the roof of a local school to retrieve a ball. The roof was slippery and he fell. He broke both arms and had casts on his arms. Straps elevated the cast. When the girls went missing, he still had the casts on. Amazingly, decades later, Teddy still had the casts. If Teddy had been involved in the murder, blood could have gotten onto the casts. The casts were examined, and there was no blood on them. The investigators were already doubtful that an 11-year-old boy was involved in the disappearance, and the fact that Teddy had casts on both arms when the girls went missing confirmed to them that he was not involved. Plus, no one recalled seeing a boy with 2 casts at the mall that day, let alone talking to Sheila and Katherine. The police did find something interesting in Edna Welch's home. Edna was Lloyd's stepmother. Lloyd's mother, Margaret Ann, died when he was a month shy of his 4th birthday. His father, Lee, was driving drunk and crashed the car. Lloyd's mother, who was pregnant with twins, died in the crash. Lee spent time in prison for manslaughter. Lee Welch died in 1998 at age 65. Around the time the sisters went missing, Lloyd and his girlfriend, Helen, were living with Lee and his stepmother, Edna. When the police searched Edna's home, They found a letter from Lloyd that had been written 5 months before the police interviewed him for the first time about the Lyons sisters. It was written in response to a letter that Edna wrote to him in prison. The letter she wrote to him was never found. Lloyd wrote in the letter that he knew nothing about the 2 girls who went missing from Wheaton. Detective Dave Davis had called Edna when he was looking for Lloyd to talk to him about being a possible witness. He did not tell Edna why he was looking for Lloyd. Yet Edna wrote to Lloyd and told him the police were investigating him for the disappearance of the Lyons sisters. Why would Edna have assumed that? Also, in the letter, Lloyd asked about Helen, his girlfriend at the time. It had been more than 30 years since Lloyd saw or heard from Helen. He wasn't even aware she had died from cancer years earlier. The detective surmised that Lloyd asked about Helen because she knew something important about the case. The police talked to Lloyd's cousin, Connie Akers, who lived on Taylor's Mountain when the girls vanished. Connie remembered that in 1975, just as the weather started to get warm, Lloyd and Helen came for a visit. Lloyd had a big army-style duffel bag and bloody clothes were inside of it. He said that the blood was from grinding beef. Connie said that Lloyd told her to wash the clothes, but she refused. She also said that the bag smelled like rotted meat. Several people who lived on the mountain remembered a big bonfire that lasted for days. There was a terrible odor from the fire. Then the detectives talked to Connie's brother, Henry Parker. Connie and Henry had not been in contact for years because they had fought over their parents' inheritance. Henry said that Lloyd brought the duffel bag to Taylor's Mountain. Henry said that Lloyd told him there was the body of a dead dog in the bag. The dog had been his and Helen's, and it died in an accident. Henry said that the bag was heavy. He said it probably weighed around 70 or 80 pounds. Lloyd had planned on burying it, but the bonfire was going, and he asked Henry if he could throw it on the fire. They threw the bag on the fire together. Henry told the investigators about a phone call his mother received from Lloyd's father, Lee. Lee said that 2 girls were missing and wanted to know if they were with Lloyd. Henry said that after that, his mother refused to talk about the phone call. The detectives considered both Connie and Henry's stories reliable because Connie and Henry told them to the detectives independently. They had not been in contact since the investigation into Lloyd started. The detectives thought they had developed a strong case against Lloyd Welch. Lloyd had admitted he was in the presence of the Lyons sisters when they went missing, and 2 independent witnesses said he burned bloody clothes and what he said was the carcass of a dog. The area where the bonfire happened was searched. A charred fragment of a human bone, scraps of fabric, melted fragments of beads, and a piece of wire were found. DNA could not be extracted from the bone fragment. The detectives thought that the fabric could have come from the duffel bag or the girls' clothing. At the time the girls went missing, one of them was wearing a beaded necklace. This could have been the melted beads. The wire was consistent with Sheila's glasses. However, this was all speculation, and there was no way to prove that any of the items were connected to the disappearance of the girls. Since there was no physical evidence and Lloyd's story was constantly changing, the district attorney chose not to charge Lloyd with the murders. So Detective Dave Davis continued to interview Lloyd Welch. On January 28, 2015, in Lloyd's new version of events, he said that Helen wasn't with him when he left the mall. They went to the mall together, but she left earlier to go see her mother. Lloyd also admitted that he owned a green army-style duffel bag. Detective Davis asked Lloyd if he had ever ground up beef or owned any pets. Lloyd said he didn't. Davis thought that this was very interesting because he told Connie and Henry that the blood on the clothes was from grinding beef and the smell was the carcass of a pet dog. Davis then accused Lloyd of transporting the girls' bodies in the bag. Lloyd denied there were human bodies in the bag. Lloyd admitted he did go to Taylor's Mountain with Helen. He was trying to escape from his Uncle Richard because he feared him. He said that he hitchhiked to Taylor's Mountain and there was no way anyone would have kept him in the car with a bag that had decomposing human body parts in it. Lloyd also said that a bonfire was burning when they got there. That night he was awoken when his Uncle Richard arrived in a car. He said that Richard and Henry threw a bag onto the fire. Lloyd said he believed that the body parts of both girls were in the bag. Lloyd then had a news story about what happened the day the sisters went missing. He said that his Uncle Richard wanted to party with some girls. Lloyd said he thought that partying meant getting high, possibly drinking, and hanging out. He did not think partying meant anything sexual. That day Richard was dressed as a security guard. Richard drove him and Teddy to the mall. Lloyd admitted that Helen had not been with him that day. At the mall, he and Teddy approached the Lyons sisters and asked them if they wanted to get high. Neither girl said anything. Lloyd said that he and Teddy led the girls out to the car. 10-year-old Katherine started crying when she saw Richard in the car. But they all got into the car and drove around for a while. Then Richard said something along the lines of the girls were, quote, going to meet their maker, unquote. Lloyd said that this scared him and he got dropped off at a convenience store. A week later, his uncle drove to Taylor's Mountain and threw the bag into the fire with Henry. Then Richard drove away. On February 24, 2015, the police questioned Henry Parker again. He said that only Lloyd and Helen drove up. Richard was not with them, and he did not see him around that time. Teddy also contacted the police. He said he had another memory he had just recovered. He said he remembered going to Richard's home shortly after the girls were kidnapped. In the attic, there was a pool table. Teddy said he saw Lloyd and Helen with two blonde girls. Armed with this new information, Lloyd was interviewed again. Lloyd said that when Richard came to Taylor's Mountain, Sheila was alive in the car. Richard handed her off to Henry, who kept her captive for a while and then killed her. Lloyd said that Henry told him about the murder, but he did not remember the details. Detective Davis then pointed out to Lloyd that there were problems with his stories. For example, what are the odds that his uncle showed up at Taylor's Mountain the same day he went there? Secondly, Lloyd has always maintained he was an innocent bystander. He admitted he agreed to meet some girls, but he didn't think it was a kidnapping. He thought they were going to hang out and party. He claimed he did not rape or kill the girls, but he knew who did. The disappearance of the Lyons sisters was one of the most infamous unsolved cases in the area. When Lloyd was looking at 30 years in prison for child molestation, why didn't he ask for a better deal based on the information he had about their disappearance? Lloyd said it was because he forgot about it. Detective Davis did not believe anyone could forget that they knew that their relative had kidnapped, raped, and killed two young girls. The police believe that Lloyd never came forward with this information because he was involved in the kidnapping and murder of the Lyons. For the next several days, Lloyd was interviewed. After a lot of pressure, he admitted that after getting the girls into the car, they went to the convenience store. He got out, but then he got back into the car. Then he, Teddy, Richard, and the Lyons went to Richard's house. The girls were taken inside, then he said he went home. Lloyd said that Richard's wife, Pat, was not home at the time. Lloyd also admitted that he told the police a false story in 1975 because he was worried someone had seen him at the mall talking to the sisters and he thought he might have been a person of interest. He was hoping to lead the police away from him. Then Lloyd told Detective Davis that he was going to tell him the entire story. 2 days before the Lyons went missing, Richard told him and Teddy about his plans to pick up 2 girls to party and have sex with. Lloyd said no because he was with Helen. But then, 2 days later, Richard called him and told him he had some really good pot. So he agreed to go to the mall with him and Teddy. Lloyd said he was alone and approached the girls. He asked them if they wanted to get high. Initially, Sheila said no. He convinced Sheila to come along with him, but Katherine didn't want to go. He said that Sheila convinced her younger sister to go with them. They walked out to the car, and then Teddy joined them. They drove around for a while and smoked marijuana. Katherine, who was 10, was crying in the back seat. Then they arrived at Richard's house. Lloyd said that Richard and Teddy argued about something. Then Richard said, quote, "Well, they can always beat their maker," unquote. Lloyd said that he got a bad feeling, so he went home. He returned the next day because he wanted to know how the girls were doing. He said he saw Richard raping one of the girls. Detective Davis lied to Lloyd and said they had Helen's diary. He said that Helen wrote that she, Lloyd, and 2 blonde girls were in Richard's attic. In reality, it was Teddy who said he saw Lloyd, Helen, and 2 blonde girls in the attic. Lloyd said that Richard asked him to babysit the girls on Easter Sunday. Lloyd said that they watched them in the upstairs pool room. 2 days later, he went to the mall and gave the police the story he hoped would clear him as a suspect. Then Lloyd said that Richard came to his home and talked to his father, Lee. Lloyd said that Lee and Richard told him to leave town and go to Taylor's Mountain to hide out for a while. Lloyd said that he and Helen hitchhiked to the area. Hours after getting to Taylor's Mountain, Richard arrived with the bag, which he tossed onto the fire. Lloyd said he knew that the remains of the Lyons sisters were in the bag. On May 1st, 2015, another interview with Lloyd was conducted. He said his father, Lee, and his uncle, Richard, asked him to go to Virginia. They wanted him to leave because they knew he had been spotted at the mall. So they said it was best to get out of town. He said that he and Helen hitchhiked to Taylor's Mountain. As they were leaving, he saw his Uncle Richard take the girls to a spot under a bridge where he liked to hang out. He wasn't sure what happened to the girls, but he said they may have been strangled and dismembered with an axe and stuffed into a duffel bag under the bridge. Or the girls were still alive on the drive to Taylor's Mountain. Then they did something that led his father and uncle to kill them. Detective Davis found the bridge that Lloyd was talking about, but he doubted someone could have been murdered and dismembered there without anyone noticing. The police never searched the home Richard lived in at the time of the disappearance because it had been demolished. After looking under the bridge, Davis went to the house where Lloyd was staying at the time of the disappearance, his father Lee's home. The house was still there, and not a lot of work had been done on it in the decades since the girls went missing. He discovered the house had a basement, which he could only enter through an exterior door. In several Lloyd stories, he said his uncle held the girls in a basement that had a separate entrance. Lloyd talked to the current owners of the house, and they agreed to allow a forensic team to examine it. They sprayed a blood detection agent around the basement. One area of the basement lit up. It was clear that something very violent, like a dismemberment, happened in that area of the basement. Forensic experts determined it was human blood. However, there were only traces of hemoglobin, and that was enough material to obtain a DNA sample. But it was the first time genuine physical evidence had been found in the case. On May 12, 2015, Detective Davis talked to Lloyd again. Lloyd had a new variation of events. He said that Richard approached him and said he wanted to get two girls to make a porno film with. Detective Davis knew that Richard had been into pornography and he owned a video camera. Lloyd said that he went to the mall with his uncle and his father. This was the first time he didn't mention Teddy being involved. Lloyd said that he offered the girls pot and Sheila said yes. Sheila then forced Katherine to come along with her. They got into the car and drove around while smoking marijuana. Katherine cried in the back seat. Then they went to Richard's house and Lloyd claimed he left. Lloyd said they came back the next day and saw Richard raping one of the girls. His father was recording it with a video camera. Lloyd said that on Easter Sunday, 5 days after they disappeared, he and Helen watched the girls at Richard's house. He said they were babysitting them. He said Teddy stopped by and saw the girls. Lloyd said 2 days later he went to the mall and told the security guard his story. His uncle, father, and stepmother were angry that he had talked to the police. They told him he should leave town. As he and Helen set off to hitchhike, they saw Richard and the two girls drive towards the bridge. Then Richard came to Taylor's Mountain and burned the bag. Lloyd said he believed Richard wanted to use the girls to make child sexual abuse material, then he wanted to sell them to human traffickers. He believed something went wrong and Katherine tried to escape. He thought that Katherine might have tried to escape because she was the one who didn't want to smoke marijuana. Then his uncle and father accidentally killed her. He thought it was probably her body in the bag. Detective Davis continued to push Lloyd. Lloyd then said that his uncle and father abused the girls for a week. Lloyd said that about a week after they went missing, he went into the basement of his father's home to get high. When he entered the basement, he saw Katherine lying on the floor. While straddling her, his father broke her neck. Then Richard used the axe to cut her into 4 or 5 pieces. He said it happened in the area where the blood was found. Over 19 months, Lloyd Welch had been interviewed over a dozen times. The detectives believed aspects of his final story, but not everything. In every story Lloyd told, he provided a little bit more information about what happened to the Lyons sisters, but he also tried to diminish his responsibility in every story. The investigators did not believe that Teddy was involved in any way. He was just 11 years old at the time, and he had casts on both of his arms. But the police weren't sure about Richard Welch. He was adamant he had nothing to do with the murders. For months, the police interviewed a man named Wes Justice. He was another nephew of Richard and a cousin of Lloyd's. Justice said he was never close with Richard or Lloyd. Justice said in the summer of 2014 he stopped by Richard's home. He said that Richard confessed that he and Lloyd kidnapped the girls. They had raped them on a pool table. The girls were then taken to Taylor's Mountain, but he wasn't sure if they were dead or alive when they were taken there. Justice said that Richard told him they were chopped up and burned. The detectives thought that this was oddly specific because, at the time, it was not public knowledge that the investigators believed that at least one of the girls was dismembered and burned. Justice said that Richard asked him to find the car that transported the girls and get rid of it. After some consideration, the investigators discounted Wes Justice's story. Richard and Justice weren't close, and Richard had told everyone he was not involved in the girls' disappearance. Why would he suddenly confess to a nephew he rarely talked to? The detectives think that Justice just told them what they wanted to hear. Ultimately, the police never found evidence that Richard was involved in the disappearance of Sheila and Katherine Lyon. He has never been charged in connection with their disappearance. The detectives are unsure if Lloyd's father, Lee, was involved. After all, the blood was found in his home. When the investigation into Lloyd began, Lee had been dead for over a decade and a half, so it was of little legal consequence if he was involved in the kidnapping and murder of the sisters. On July 14, 2015, Lloyd Welch was charged with the murders of Sheila and Katherine Lyon. Davis interviewed him again after he was indicted. Lloyd told him he didn't know how Katherine died, but his father and uncle dismembered her and put her in the bag. The bag was put into a car, and Lloyd said he drove the car to Taylor's Mountain. Then he and Henry threw the bag on the fire. Lloyd said that he drove home and returned the car to Richard. Lloyd claimed he only disposed of the body because he was afraid of his uncle and father. Lloyd said a few days later he hitchhiked with Helen to Taylor's Mountain and they stayed there for a few days. Lloyd Welch ultimately agreed to a plea deal. He was spared the death penalty by pleading guilty to 2 counts of felony murder. On September 12, 2017, 42 years after Sheila and Katherine Lyon disappeared, Lloyd Welch was sentenced to 48 years of prison. He had to finish his current sentence before starting his next sentence. Despite pleading guilty, Lloyd maintained he never raped or murdered the Lyon sisters. Shortly after Lloyd was sentenced, Taylor's Mountain was searched again. The searchers found a tooth that belonged to a child who was about 12 years old. But unfortunately, the sheriff's office lost the tooth before more analysis could be done. While the 2 convictions brought some closure to the case, there are many unanswered questions. No confirmed physical remains of Katherine and Sheila Lyon have ever been found. It's believed that Katherine was killed and dismembered in Lee's home where Lloyd was living at the time, and then her remains were burned on the bonfire. Lloyd never said how Sheila was killed, but the police assumed she was murdered as well, and her remains are somewhere on Taylor's Mountain in Bedford. As recently as October 2024, the police searched Taylor's Mountain. If anything was found, it has not been made public. Four detectives work on the case, and each has a different theory about what happened to Sheila and Katherine. Detective Dave Davis thinks that Lloyd kidnapped and raped the girls in some woods near the mall. Davis said that before the girls were kidnapped, there were reports from young girls at the mall who said a man approached them. He claimed he was a security guard and he flashed a badge. He ordered the girls to come with him. Davis thinks that Lloyd did this with Sheila and Katherine, which is how he lured them out of the mall. Then he took them to his father's basement. The same day the girls were kidnapped, a station wagon had been stolen from a car lot near the mall. The car was found abandoned near Lloyd's father's home. Davis thinks that Helen may have helped Lloyd. Davis believes that Lloyd killed Katherine and dismembered her, possibly with his father's help. Then Lloyd, Helen, and possibly Lee drove to Taylor's Mountain and threw her remains into the fire. Davis thinks that Sheila was still alive at this point. He thinks Sheila was passed to Henry Parker, who sexually abused her, killed her, and disposed of her body. Henry was never charged in connection with the disappearance of the girls. He died in 2017. Whatever Henry knew about the disappearance of the 2 girls, he took to his grave with him. Another theory comes from Katie Leggett, the polygraph examiner. She does not believe that Lloyd would have been able to commit that type of crime and get away with it alone. She thinks his family, including his father and uncle, were members of a pedophile and child sexual abuse material ring. They manipulated Lloyd into kidnapping girls. She thinks they were held in abuse in Lee's basement by Lee, Lloyd, Richard, and possibly other members of the ring. Then the girls were taken to Richard's home. Leggett surmises they were moved because there was better lighting for movies in Richard's home. Leggett believes that Katherine was killed in the basement, then Henry Parker killed Sheila. Another detective on the case, Mark Janney, thinks that Lee and Richard got Lloyd to lure the girls to the car. He believes that Richard and Lee wanted to make child sexual abuse material then sell the girls into sexual slavery. They were taken to Lee's home and held in the basement. They were moved to Richard's home on Easter Sunday because Lee was hosting a family gathering. Before they could sell the girls, things got out of hand. Then they were killed and their bodies were disposed of on Taylor's Hill. Detective Chris Homrock, who found the transcript of the statement Lloyd made to the police, believes that both girls were raped and murdered. He believes that Lloyd, Lee, and Richard were part of a pedophile ring. His original suspect, Ray Milski, was part of the same ring. In January 2018, writer and journalist Mark Bowden visited Lloyd Welch in prison. Bowden is best known for writing Black Hawk Down and Killing Pablo. At the time, he was writing a book about the Lyon case. When Bowden met with Lloyd, he continued to deny he killed the girls. Bowden had a message from Lloyd from Detective Dave Davis. If Lloyd revealed the location of the remains, his prison account would always have money in it. Lloyd had nothing to lose by revealing where the bodies were located. He had already pled guilty to the murders, so he couldn't get any more time. The deal would only benefit him. But Lloyd maintained he didn't know what happened to the bodies. At the time of this recording, 67-year-old Lloyd Welch is in custody in Virginia, but it's unclear where. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you are interested in learning more about the case, please check out Mark Bowden's book, The Last Stone, a masterpiece of criminal interrogation. Unfortunately, this is our last episode, then we're going on an indefinite hiatus. We truly appreciate you listening and all the support over the 3 years we did this podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please check out our YouTube channels, Criminally Listed and Paranormally Listed, where we'll continue to post new material. Thank you again for listening. Please stay safe and take care of yourself.